Hi, this is Ed from Wright. Today we're going to talk about your oil change interval, the types of filters and oil that you can use in your hydro system. So first off, today we're talking specifically about the components used in your pump and motor systems. If you have a mower with a ZT transmission, this oil is fine to use. It's actually a little bit higher spec than what Hydro Gear might recommend normally, but their oil is fine as well. But today we're focusing on the oil change intervals and features around the pump and motor systems. So let's talk about the oil change interval. A few years ago we moved from Mobil 1 oil to the oil that we use here, and part of that was to use an oil that shears down slower than the Mobil 1 oil, and so now we recommend that you change your oil every 500 hours. And that's a bit of a guideline. What's really important is that generally you have a responsible maintenance practice. In most cases, if you put 600 hours of machine on your machine a year and you change that oil once a year, you'll be fine. Now, also, if you're putting 50 hours of machine on a year, you don't want to wait 10 years before changing your oil. You're going to want to do that a little bit sooner. I wouldn't necessarily say annually. You could probably go 2 to 3 years before changing your oil and be just fine. And part of that is if you store the machine outdoors or where it has very wide swings in temperature, the sun shines on it and then it cools down every day, that machine's going to pull moisture into the tank every day, and that'll break down the oil a little bit. But if it's stored in a controlled setting, like maybe in a barn or something like that, it's going to bring in less moisture, and so 3 years would be fine if you're not getting to 500 hours first. Okay, so let's first talk about the oil. The oil here is really I would say a derivative of a diesel engine oil. It's got a lot of similar properties to that. And that's very much different than transmission oil that you'd put in a truck, or tractor oil that you'd put in an agricultural type tractor, utility tractor. And a lot different than a hydraulic oil you'd put in a piece of industrial machinery, manufacturing machinery or something like that. And this is very important. If you put transmission oil or tractor oil in this machine, there's a lot of friction modifiers in there that are designed to work well with wet clutches or wet brakes. And that's really what we don't want in this system. So never use transmission fluid, and don't, there are people out there who will tell you, oh, use this oil, it's the best oil, but it's not for a closed loop hydrostatic system. Also, our oil is really custom around the use of a lawnmower, which doesn't tend to get used in sub-zero temperatures. And so we tend to use oils that are a lot thicker. We're trying to manage very high temperatures here. And so, again, the oils that we use is specified for that type of situation. So the oil we recommend is a 15W50. This oil here is not an engine oil. It's a little bit different in that it's going to have less of the things that would manage the products of combustion, such as the detergents or the components in there that would help the oil not become acidic from the products of combustion. Instead, this oil has pretty high levels of anti-wear additives, which is important when cold starting certain types of components, and something you typically won't find in an automotive oil like the Mobil 1 oil, because that oil has to play along well with the catalysts that are in your exhaust system of your engine. In a hydro system, we're not worried about that. So although this is a derivative of an engine oil, there's a few things in it that will help it perform a lot better. It's also refined much closer to the viscosity that we need, so there's less viscosity modifiers in there to break down at our higher temperatures. So it's a phenomenal oil. Obviously, as an OEM, we want to be recommending an OEM oil. And a lot of times that's done in our industry in order to drive more revenue at the manufacturer. And in our case, we really moved to this oil. Our impetus to work out this oil was because we saw the shear thinning on the Mobil 1 oil, and to help solve that issue. So you can use your Mobil 1 15W50. If you are doing that, it will shear down a little bit thinner, and I would recommend that you probably have your oil change interval if you're using the Mobil 1 1550. But in some cases, it's the easiest oil you can get to if you need to top something up, and that's fine. All right, so now let's talk about the filter. This filter here is actually a suction filter, which is different than a filter you might have on an engine or a log splitter or something that where it would be a pressure filter. A suction filter tends to have no bypass mechanism in here, sort of a check valve, and also This filter, the media in here is designed for that suction. And a filter is rated both by microns, but also what they call a beta efficiency. And the beta efficiency is how much that filter filters on its first pass. And that's important because it affects the flow rate of oil through the filter. And so there's a lot of filters that might be cross-referenced to this filter here, but the issue is that oftentimes the flow rate isn't high enough and it'll starve the system and actually can lead to failure of the hydro system. So we really don't recommend that you match up a filter that looks the same or maybe has the same micron rating at an auto parts store or other aftermarket brands because we've definitely seen the failures and we can't stand behind the warranty of those filters. Essentially, you're on your own at some level to take a pressure filter or any generic non-bypass filter and put it on there. It's a small price to pay for the assurance of quality. And we warrant the system if this filter is used. So again, it's a small price to pay for the value of your warranty. The part number on this is 34490002. And there's a place on here to mark your oil change interval, both the date and the hours. And so that's one of the easiest ways to ensure that your oil changes are being done correctly, is just write it on there. Yeah, it's good to use other tracking systems, but if anything gets lost, you can always look back at this. So hopefully that's helpful to you, help you understand a little bit more about your hydro system. When you change your oil, we recognize that about a third of the oil tends to stay in the pumps, and that's part of what we expect when we're talking about these oil change intervals. And if you drain the oil from your pumps all the way out, you do risk that you're dry starting the pump. So it's better off to leave some of that oil in there and just drain what's in the tank and replenish that. You'll be fine. Another tip is that in some cases the filter might be installed above something else, and so it can dribble down when you take it off. If you take a 2-liter bottle and you cut it out kind of as a scoop shape, it's very easy to put that scoop around the filter as you're removing it and the filter's sliding into the scoop, and then you drip or leak very little oil. It's also very handy when you're changing the filter on the side of an engine, which is typically up above a surface that you don't want the oil to accumulate on. Anyhow, hopefully these things are helpful to you as you take care of your equipment.